In the forgotten corners of the kingdom, a peasant girl named Anya fought for scraps, her hands raw from work, her future as empty as her stomach. Miles away in a castle of cold stone, the celebrated Princess Serafina prepared to marry their nation's most feared enemy, sealing a pact of treason. One girl had everything, the other had nothing. But a single deathbed confession from the queen would change it all, because the princess in the castle was a lie, and the peasant girl in the mud was the true heir to the throne, swapped at birth to protect her from a deadly secret. Now she must rise from the ashes of her stolen life to expose the fraud and claim her crown before it's lost forever. In the cold heart of Castle Solhaven, where sunlight struggled through tall, stained glass windows to touch the marble floors, a girl was less than a shadow. Her name was Anya, and her world was defined by the scent of lye soap, the ache in her bones, and the practiced art of being invisible. The stones she scrubbed were smoother than any silk she had ever touched, polished by generations of servants just like her, their histories as unseen as her own. She kept her head down, her movements small and efficient, a ghost haunting the edges of a world she was not meant to inhabit. The grand tapestries lining the walls depicted heroic battles and legendary kings of Eldoria, their woven eyes staring down at her with the same indifference as the living nobles who passed by. The sound of laughter, sharp and brittle as ice, echoed from the far end of the hall. Anya's shoulders tensed. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. Princess Lyra, the jewel of the kingdom, was holding court with her ladies-in-waiting, their vibrant silks a stark contrast to Anya's drab, threadbare tunic. Lyra was beautiful in the way a winter frost is beautiful, pristine, cold, and dangerous to the touch. Her power in the castle was absolute, especially now, with her mother, Queen Isolde, growing weaker by the day. Anya tried to shrink further into herself, hoping to finish her work and retreat to the relative safety of the kitchens. But fate, or perhaps Lyra's boredom, had other plans. A fine embroidered glove, dropped with deliberate carelessness, landed in the murky puddle of water beside Anya's bucket. Lyra's voice cut through the air. "Oh dear, it seems I've dropped my glove. Girl, fetch it." The ladies-in-waiting giggled, their eyes feasting on the small drama. Anya's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to stay down, to not engage. But a direct order from the princess could not be ignored. Slowly she reached a trembling hand toward the soiled glove, the fine fabric now stained with grime. As her fingers brushed against it, Lyra took a step forward, her pointed shoe pressing down on Anya's hand, grinding it against the cold, wet stone. Pain, sharp and immediate, shot up Anya's arm. "Be careful with it," Lyra said, her voice a sweet poison. "It is worth more than you are." Anya bit back a cry, her eyes squeezed shut. She held perfectly still, a statue of submission, until the pressure was released. When she looked up, Lyra was smiling, a look of serene satisfaction on her face. Anya picked up the glove, her hand throbbing, and offered it without a word. Lyra didn't take it. Instead, she let it fall back to the floor. "It's ruined now," the princess declared with a theatrical sigh. "Utterly worthless, just like the hands." That touched it. She turned to her entourage. "Let's leave this filth. The stench of poverty offends me." As they swept away, their laughter trailing behind them, Anya was left kneeling in the puddle, her small moment of public humiliation complete. She didn't move, not until the heavy footsteps of the captain of the royal guard, Sir Kale, stopped beside her. He was a mountain of a man, his face a permanent scowl, his loyalty to Lyra as solid as the stone walls around them. "Did the princess give you an order, girl?" he grunted, his voice a low rumble. "Clean this mess." He nudged her roughly with the toe of his boot. "And be grateful for the air you breathe in this castle. It is a gift, not a right." Anya finally looked up, her gaze meeting his for a fraction of a second. He saw nothing there but a peasant's fear. He could not see the cold, observant intelligence behind her eyes, the part of her that filed away every injustice, every cruel word, every face. He could not see the embers of a fire banked so low it was almost extinguished. She nodded mutely, picking up her bucket and rags. She fled to the kitchens, the one place where the servants were a guild of ghosts together. The air was thick with the smell of roasting meat and baking bread, a comforting chaos that drowned out the echoing silence of the grand halls. An older cook, Marta, saw her face and the red imprint on her hand and simply pushed a warm, fresh roll into her other hand, a silent gesture of solidarity that meant more than words ever could. Anya ate it in a corner, the warmth spreading through her, a temporary shield against the chill of her existence. Her life was a tapestry of such moments, small cruelties punctuated by even smaller kindnesses. She survived by watching, by learning the routines of the castle, the secret fears of the nobles she served, the rivalries between the guards. She knew who was having an affair, who was in debt, and who whispered treason when they thought no one was listening. This knowledge was her only possession, a secret armory in a war she was silently losing. But the winds of change were beginning to stir outside the castle walls, winds that would soon breach its defenses. As Anya was refilling a water basin, the sound of a horn blast echoed from the main gate, sharp and clear. It was followed by the authoritative voice of a royal herald, his proclamation powerful enough to carry even to the depths of the kitchens. By order of the Queen. Regent, let it be known that Lord Malachor of the Rifflands and his retinue will arrive in 3 days hence. He comes to claim the hand of Her Royal Highness, Princess Lyra, and unite our two great realms in a sacred betrothal. A hush fell over the kitchen staff. The announcement was not unexpected, but hearing it given voice made it terrifyingly real. Lord Malachor was a name spoken in whispers, a warlord known for his brutality and his ambition. To ally with him was to invite a wolf into their home. The servants exchanged worried glances, their faces etched with a new kind of fear. For the nobles, it was a political maneuver. For the common folk, it was a death sentence. Anya stood frozen, the water pitcher heavy in her hands. This alliance, this marriage, was more than just a union of kingdoms. It was the final bolt locking the door on her miserable life. With Malachor's power backing Lyra, the princess's cruelty would no longer be a whim. It would become law. A cold dread, heavier and more profound than any she had ever felt, settled over her. The castle that was her prison was about to become her tomb. The 3 days that followed the herald's announcement were a blur of frantic, gilded preparation. Castle Solhaven, usually content in its opulent decay, was stirred into a frenzy. Suits of armor that had stood silent for decades were polished until they gleamed, their empty visors reflecting the nervous faces of the servants. Ancient banners, heavy with the dust of forgotten glory, were unfurled from the rafters, their faded golds and crimsons a testament to a stronger, prouder Eldoria. The entire castle was dressing itself for a feast, but to Anya, it felt more like it was preparing for its own funeral. Every polished shield felt like a tombstone, every unfurled banner a shroud. This nervous energy seeped into Princess Lyra, making her already short temper non-existent. She stalked the halls like a caged panther, her anxiety manifesting as heightened cruelty. She saw incompetence in every shadow and insolence in every averted gaze. The castle staff learned to move even more silently, to make themselves smaller, but it was not enough. Lyra needed a target for the fear coiling in her gut, the fear that the powerful warlord she was meant to charm would see her as the frightened, insecure girl she was. The breaking point came in the great hall, where a young serving boy, no older than 12, was helping to hang a massive banner bearing the Riftland's wolf sigil alongside Eldoria's son. His hands trembled as he stood precariously on a ladder, his task overseen by Ser Kael himself. A nervous twitch, a moment of lost balance, and a small flagon of wine he carried for the supervising noble slipped, splashing a dark red stain across the wolf's snarling muzzle. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The boy froze, his face a mask of pure terror. Lyra, who had been observing from across the hall, strode toward him, her steps slow and deliberate. "Do you know what you have done?" she asked, her voice deceptively calm. The boy could only stammer, tears welling in his eyes. "You have defaced the sigil of our guest. You have brought shame upon this castle, upon me." She turned to Sir Kyle, her voice hardening to steel. "This cannot be tolerated. The staff has grown lazy, complacent. Make an example of him. 10 lashes, in the courtyard, now." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. 10 lashes could kill a boy so young. I. Few nobles looked uneasy, but no one dared to speak. Sir Kyle grinned, a cruel twist of his lips. He enjoyed these moments. He grabbed the boy by the collar, dragging him from the ladder as he sobbed and pleaded. Anya was clearing dishes from a nearby table, and she saw it all. She saw the boy's white-faced terror. She saw the other servants shrink away, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and relief that it wasn't them. Most of all, she saw the cold, unwavering satisfaction on Lyra's face, as the boy's cries for mercy were ignored. In that moment, the fear that had been Anya's constant companion for years began to change, crystallizing into something harder, colder. It was the birth of rage, a silent, helpless fury that burned away her sorrow. She felt a profound, aching injustice, not just for herself, but for the weeping boy, for the entire silent, terrified castle. Later that day, her duties took her to the upper corridors, a wing of the castle where the air was thick with the scent of old parchment and secrets. As she passed a secluded alcove, she heard the hushed, urgent voices of 2 nobles, Lord Valerius and Lord Cregan, men who sat on the royal council. She flattened herself into the shadows, listening. "The treasury is nearly empty," Valerius whispered, his voice strained. "The Queen's illness has cost us a fortune, and Lyra's spending is unsustainable. This marriage is an act of desperation." "It is an act of suicide," Cregan countered, his tone grim. "Malachor will not be a son-in-law. He will be a master. He will see Lyra's weakness for what it is, and once the old queen passes, he will not need to honor any treaty. He will simply take Eldoria for himself. Then we are trading our debts for chains," Valerius sighed. "The girl is not her father. King Alaric would never have allowed this. He was strong. And he is gone," Cregan finished, "and we are left with her." The nobles moved on, their whispers fading, leaving Anya alone in the corridor, her heart like a stone in her chest. It was true. All of it. The kingdom was rotting from the head down, and they were all trapped. Her rage from the courtyard now had a direction, a focus. It was no longer just about Lyra's personal cruelty, but her catastrophic failure as a leader. The fate of everyone, from the highest noble to the lowest servant, was tied to the whims of an arrogant, foolish girl. In that moment, the weight of a kingdom's suffering felt as if it settled squarely on her shoulders. She was just a scullery maid, a ghost in the halls, yet she felt the pain of its people more keenly than the princess ever could. Her quiet fury was a silent prayer for justice in a castle that had forgotten the meaning of the word. At that moment, the fate of an entire kingdom rested on the shoulders of a single woman. If you believe in her courage, click like. The day of Lord Malachor's arrival dawned gray and oppressive. The castle was immaculate, a perfect, polished prison awaiting its new warden. Anya kept to her tasks, her mind a whirlwind of overheard conversations and witnessed cruelties. She was in the noisy, steamy chaos of the kitchens late in the afternoon, mechanically chopping vegetables, when the back door creaked open. It was not a cook or a delivery boy. A member of the Queen's personal guard stood there, his armor pristine, his face impassive. His gaze swept the room, ignoring the head cook and the bustling staff, before it landed directly on Anya. He moved with a purpose that silenced the room, stopping directly in front of her workstation. The other servants stared, their mouths agape. Anya's blood ran cold. "Anya," the guard said, his voice formal and devoid of emotion. He did not know her, yet he knew her name. "The Queen Regent requires your presence in her chambers." He paused, his eyes unblinking. Immediately, a wave of stunned silence rolled through the kitchen. The head cook dropped a ladle with a loud clatter. Whispers, erupted. Anya, the queen. Why? It was impossible. She had never spoken a word to the queen in her life. She was a creature of the kitchens and corridors, not the royal chambers. This was a mistake, or worse, it was a trap. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, terrified drumbeat. A summons from the frail, dying queen on the very day a warlord arrived to claim the kingdom? It made no sense. And in Castle Solhaven, things that made no sense were often deadly. Time seemed to stop. The boy, clatter and chatter of the kitchen faded into a dull roar as Anya followed the impassive guard. Her feet, usually so sure-footed in the castle's hidden pathways, felt clumsy and foreign on the plush runners of the royal corridors. They passed portraits of kings and queens whose names she barely knew, their painted eyes following her procession. Servants and nobles alike stopped to stare at the bizarre spectacle. The queen's personal guard escorting a girl in a dirt-smudged tunic, a lamb being led through the halls of wolves. Anya's mind raced, searching for a reason. Had she been accused of theft? Had Lyra invented some new terrible punishment? Every possibility was a doorway to pain, and she could not imagine one that led anywhere good. The guard stopped before a set of ornate carved wooden doors, the entrance to the queen's private wing. He pushed them open without a word and gestured for her to enter. The room beyond was vast and shadowed, heavy with the cloying scent of incense and dying flowers. A grand fireplace stood cold and empty, and the air was thick with a stillness that felt heavier than silence. In the center of the room, surrounded by draped silks and mountains of pillows, was a canopied bed. And in that bed, looking smaller and more fragile than Anya could ever have imagined, was Queen Isolde. A royal physician was mixing a tonic at a nearby table, but the queen waved a weak, dismissive hand. "Leave us," she commanded, her voice a dry rasp, yet it held the unmistakable echo of authority. The physician bowed low, casting a bewildered glance at Anya before quietly exiting the room, closing the heavy doors behind him. They were alone. Anya's heart hammered against her ribs. She stood frozen just inside the doorway, unsure of what to do. "Come closer, child," the queen whispered. Hesitantly, Anya took a few steps forward, her rough-spun tunic feeling like an insult in the opulent chamber. The queen's face was a pale, drawn mask, but her eyes, sunken and dark, were surprisingly sharp. They fixed on Anya with an intensity that seemed to peel back the layers of her soul. "They call you Anya, yes?" the queen asked. Anya could only manage a numb nod. "And the woman who raised you, a weaver from the village of Oakhaven. She passed from the fever 2 winters ago." Anya stared, shocked into silence. How could the queen possibly know that? It was a detail so small, so insignificant. The queen saw the confusion on her face, and a flicker of pain crossed her own. "There is much you do not know. A story that begins before you were born." She took a rattling breath, gathering her strength. "There was a prophecy made by a seeress on the day of your birth. She foretold that the king's firstborn daughter would be a great queen, but that she would be claimed by a shadow before her first winter." The queen's eyes filled with tears. "I was a new mother, terrified. Your father, King Alaric, he was a man of action, not superstition. But I could not bear the thought of losing you." Anya's mind recoiled. The queen was delirious. She was mistaking her for someone else. "So I did a terrible thing," Queen Isolde continued, her voice cracking with the weight of a 20-year guilt. "I made a pact with a loyal nobleman whose wife had just given birth to a daughter of her own. We swapped the children. We sent the true princess away, to be raised in secret, in safety, far from the shadow of the prophecy. And we brought his daughter here, to be raised as our own." The world tilted. The air grew thin. Anya felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the stone floor beneath her had turned to water. The queen's words made no sense, yet they were spoken with a terrifying, desperate sincerity. The prophecy was a lie. "Or perhaps we fulfilled it in our own way," the queen choked out. "The shadow that claimed my daughter was not death. It was silence. It was servitude, It was a life stolen from her. The queen reached under her pillow, her hand trembling as she pulled out a heavy, ornate locket attached to a thick golden chain. It was exquisitely crafted, a sunburst of gold and silver. It was an object of impossible value, something Anya would never even dream of touching. Lyra knows nothing of this. She believes she is the true heir, the queen said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. She beckoned Anya closer, right to the edge of the bed, and pressed the locket into her hand. It was heavy and warm from the queen's body. This was your father's. He would have given it to you on your first name day. Open it. With fumbling, numb fingers, Anya found the clasp. The locket sprang open. On one side was a breathtakingly detailed miniature portrait of a man with kind, strong eyes and a dark beard, King Alaric, as he looked in the grand painting in the main hall. On the other side, inscribed in the gold in a flowing script, were two words, Fire and Truth. Anya stared at the inscription, and a memory, fragmented and strange, surfaced from the deepest part of her mind. Her adoptive mother, delirious with fever just before she died, had held Anya's face in her hands and whispered those very words. At the time, Anya had thought it was meaningless, rambling. Now the words struck her like a physical blow. "My daughter," the queen breathed, her grip on Anya's arm surprisingly strong. "My Anya, forgive me." Her eyes pleaded, two dark pools of endless regret. "Lyra is weak. She will sell this kingdom to that warlord for a hollow crown. She will destroy everything your father built. You must not let that happen. You are the true queen. You have his fire, you have his strength. Reclaim it, reclaim your birthright, save them." Her voice trailed off. Her hand went limp, her eyes losing their focus, staring now at something beyond the canopy of the bed, beyond the walls of the castle. A final shuddering sigh escaped her lips, and then there was only silence. Queen Isolde was dead. Anya stood paralyzed, the queen's last words echoing in the vast, empty room. The heavy locket was a brand in her palm. The truth of it was an earthquake in her soul, shattering the foundations of her entire existence. She was not Anya, the scullery maid. She was Anya, the lost princess, the rightful queen of Eldoria. Panic, cold and sharp, finally cut through her shock. She was alone in a room with the dead monarch, holding a priceless royal artifact. If she were found here, she would be accused of theft, of murder, of witchcraft. She had to flee. Clutching the locket so tightly its edges dug into her skin, she slipped out of the room, a true ghost now, haunted by the truth. She moved on instinct, down servant staircases and through forgotten corridors, her mind a maelstrom of confusion, grief, and a terrifying nascent anger. She reached the sanctuary of her tiny windowless room in the servants' quarters and bolted the door. She collapsed onto her straw mattress, her body trembling. She opened her hand and stared at the locket, the golden sunburst seeming to glow in the dim light. It was real. This was all real. The story was too detailed, the locket too specific, the dying words of two mothers, years apart, too perfectly aligned to be a coincidence. But what could she do? Who would believe her? A peasant girl against a princess? Her thoughts snagged on something Lord Cregan had said in the hallway. People remembered him, they respected him, and there was one man left in the castle who had served the king not just as a councilman, but as a friend. A man who had been disgraced by Lyra, who despised what the kingdom had become. A new feeling began to push through her fear, a fragile but insistent tendril of purpose. She couldn't do this alone. She needed proof beyond the locket. She needed a witness. She needed someone who knew the old ways, who knew the king's heart. Her mind settled on a single name, a single hope in the gathering darkness. Sir Gareth. The four walls of her tiny chamber felt like they were closing in. The straw mattress, a bed of thorns. For a long while Anya did not move, her world reduced to the heavy gold locket in her hand and the frantic beating of her own heart. The queen's dying words echoed in the suffocating silence, a truth so immense it threatened to tear her apart. Every moment of her life, every scraped knuckle, every casual cruelty from Lyra, every ounce of shame she had been forced to swallow, it was all a lie. A grand, terrible lie built to protect her, a lie that had instead become her prison. Fear, cold and familiar, coiled in her stomach. She was one girl, a servant, her word against a princess who was about to be backed by the most feared warlord in the 5 kingdoms. To speak this truth would be to sign her own death warrant. The easiest thing, the safest thing, would be to throw the locket into the deepest well, to forget the queen's fevered confession, and to retreat back into the shadows where she had always lived. But as she stared at the noble, kind face of King Alaric in the miniature portrait, something else began to burn through the fear. It was the cold, hard rage she had felt in the courtyard, now stoked by a lifetime of stolen dignity. It was the memory of the queen's desperate plea. It was the thought of Eldoria, being handed over to a man like Malachor. The girl who had learned to survive by being invisible died in that small, airless room. In her place, a queen began to wake. Her fear did not vanish, but it was no longer her master. It was now merely a tool, something to be managed, something to sharpen her senses. She would not run, she would not hide. She would fight. Her first thought was her only hope, Sir Gareth. She tucked the locket securely beneath her tunic, the cool metal a secret fire against her skin, and slipped out of her room. Finding him would be a risk. The old knight kept to himself, secluded in a disused chamber in the North Tower, a place of drafts and memories. To seek him out was a deliberate act, a step onto a path from which there would be no return. She found him exactly where the castle gossip said he would be, in a circular room filled with old maps, mismatched pieces of armor, and the ghosts of a better time. He was cleaning a rusted sword, his movements slow and methodical, his face a mask of grim resignation. He looked up as she entered, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What do you want, girl?" he asked, his voice rough as gravel. "This is not the kitchen." Anya's courage almost failed her. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "Sir Gareth, I need to ask you something. About King Alaric." Gareth's posture stiffened at the mention of his old friend's name. "The king is dead. Let him rest." "I can't," she said, her voice growing stronger. She took a deep breath and pulled the locket from her tunic, holding it out on her flattened palm. "Do you recognize this?" The old knight's eyes fell upon the golden sunburst. For a moment, he simply stared, his gruff demeanor dissolving into stunned disbelief. He put down the sword and took a step closer, his gaze locked on the object. "Where?" he breathed, his voice tight with an emotion she couldn't name. "Where did you get that?" "The Queen," Anya said softly. "She gave it to me, just before she died." With a trembling hand, Gareth reached out and took the locket. He handled it with a reverence that made Anya's heart ache, his large, scarred fingers tracing the familiar lines of the sunburst. He found the clasp and opened it. The narrator describes his gaze falling upon the portrait of the king, and a low, pained sound escaped his throat. He read the inscription, and his shoulders sagged, the weight of 20 years of grief and confusion crashing down upon him. "I was there when the king commissioned this," Gareth said, his voice thick with memory. "He called it his Sun and Truth. He said it was for his daughter, so she would never forget she was the light of his life and the soul of the kingdom. He was heartbroken when it was lost in the fire that took the royal nursery. The fire, they said, nearly claimed the princess." He looked from the locket to Anya's face, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw the shape of her eyes, the line of her jaw, faint echoes of the king and queen he had loved. The fire was a lie. It was all a lie. In that moment, the last vestiges of Anya's doubt were swept away. It was true. All of it. Sir Gareth's eyes, old and weary, filled with a new, fierce light. He closed the locket with a decisive snap and looked at Anya, his gaze no longer aimed at a servant, but at his sovereign. Slowly, stiffly, the old lion of Eldoria bent his knee and bowed his head. "What I thought was lost is found," he said, his voice ringing with renewed conviction. "My sword, my life, my counsel, they are yours, my queen." Tears streamed down Anya's face, the first she had allowed herself to shed. They were not tears of sorrow, but of overwhelming relief. She was not alone. She bid him rise, and for the next hour they spoke in hushed, urgent tones. The fear and shock were replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Anya told him everything she had seen and heard: Lyra's cruelty, her recklessness, the noble's fears, the arrival of Malachor. Gareth, in turn, explained the political landscape, the few families who might still hold loyalty to her father's memory, and the weakness of Lyra's position, which rested entirely on a lie. "A simple accusation will get you killed," Gareth stated, his mind already shifting to the battlefield of strategy. "We cannot strike until the iron is white hot. We need to expose her in a way that leaves no room for doubt, in a place where her allies cannot save her." "The betrothal feast," Anya said immediately, her mind latching onto the perfect stage, "in front of Lord Malachor and the entire court." Gareth nodded, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Yes, we will turn her moment of triumph into her hour of judgment." He began to pace the small room. "But the locket is not enough. We need more. We need to erode her authority before the final blow. I will speak with a few old friends, plant the seeds of doubt. But you, your grace, you have the greater weapon." "I do?" Anya asked, confused. "You are invisible," he said, his eyes gleaming. "You hear everything. You see everything. Use it. Your knowledge of this castle is more powerful than any army." In that dusty, forgotten room, a pact was sealed, not between kings or nobles, but between a disgraced knight and a queen in rags. The first spark of rebellion had been lit. If you want to see that spark become a wildfire that consumes the throne, subscribe to this channel and witness her rise. Gareth stopped pacing and looked at her, his expression serious. "Your first task is to gather proof of Lyra's unsuitability. She is careless, arrogant. She keeps a private ledger of her expenses, her letters. It is kept in her study. They say her favorite lady-in-waiting, Lady Cassia, is often distracted." He leaned in closer. "Find that ledger, any proof of her wastefulness, her treasonous correspondence, anything that shows her to be a danger to the realm. It will be the hammer we use to shatter her crown." Anya returned to her duties, a changed woman. On the surface, she was the same scullery maid, head down, hands busy, feet silent. But within, a quiet revolution was taking place. The sprawling, oppressive castle was no longer her prison. It had become her chessboard. Every corridor was a path of attack or retreat, every whispered conversation a potential move, and every servant a pawn, knight or bishop, in a game she was only just beginning to understand. Her lifetime of fear, once a weakness, had become her greatest asset. It was the perfect camouflage, a cloak of invisibility that allowed her to move through the halls of power, utterly ignored and therefore utterly free. Her first objective, given by Sir Gareth, was the lockbox in Lyra's study where she kept her private ledger and correspondence. For 2 days, Anya volunteered for the most undesirable tasks on the upper floors, scrubbing floors and polishing silver near the princess's wing, all while her mind worked with a cold, sharp precision. She observed. The guards at the end of the corridor changed at the turn of the noon bell. Lady Cassia, Lyra's chief, lady-in-waiting, was vain and easily distracted, spending more time gossiping with other ladies than attending to her duties. And the key to the study was not kept with a guard, but on a small, ornate hook, just inside the doorway of the adjoining sitting room, hidden behind a tapestry. It was arrogant. It was careless. It was perfect. Now she needed a distraction. Her mind sifted through the complex social web of the castle staff. She knew that the head laundress and the master of the pantry had a long-standing bitter rivalry. A simple anonymous tip to the pantry master that the laundress was accusing his staff of stealing wine would be enough to cause a loud, public argument in the main courtyard. an argument that a notorious gossip like Lady Cassia would find irresistible. The next morning, the plan was set in motion. As the noon bell began to toll, a furious shouting match erupted in the courtyard below Lyra's window. Just as Anya predicted, Lady Cassia, drawn by the commotion, abandoned her post in the sitting room to get a better view from the balcony. The guards in the corridor, momentarily distracted, turned their attention to the noise. It was a window of opportunity no more than a few minutes long. Heart pounding, Anya slipped from the hallway into the sitting room. Her hands didn't tremble as she reached behind the tapestry and her fingers closed around the cold, ornate key. She moved into Lyra's study, a room she had only ever seen from the doorway. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and waxed parchment. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. For a moment she was frozen by the sheer intimacy of the space, the private world of the girl who had stolen her life. She shook off the feeling and moved to the heavy oak desk. The lockbox was there, exactly as Gareth had described. The key turned with a well-oiled click. Inside, nestled on velvet lining, was the ledger. Anya's eyes scanned the pages quickly. It was exactly as she'd expected, only worse. Page after page detailed staggering expenses, gowns from the free cities that cost more than a farmer's entire harvest, jewels from distant lands, lavish parties for her friends. It was damning evidence of her wastefulness, but Gareth was right. It might not be enough. Her fingers brushed against a small stack of letters tucked beneath the ledger, tied with a silk ribbon. Most were frivolous notes from other nobles, but two were different. They were drafts, written in Lyra's elegant looping hand, filled with crossed-out words and reconsidered phrases. They were addressed to Lord Malachor. Anya's blood ran cold as she read. The first was a fawning, overly sweet acceptance of his proposal, but the second was a promise. In it, Lyra offered her future husband a personal gift upon their marriage, a token of her deep affection and trust. The gift was sole mining rights to the silver mines of the northern province of Eredor, the last true source of wealth in the kingdom's treasury, a resource so vital that her father, King Alaric, had passed laws making it untouchable by any single noble house, let alone a foreign power. This was not carelessness. This was not extravagance. This was high treason. Lyra was not just planning to marry a warlord, she was planning to sell him the very heart of Eldoria, piece by piece, to secure her own comfortable future. While Anya was unearthing the rot at the core of the throne, Sir Gareth was tilling the soil of rebellion. He sought out the grizzled, forgotten men who had served King Alaric. He didn't speak of a lost princess or a secret plot. He spoke of the kingdom. He sat with them in quiet taverns and dusty armories, speaking of the rising taxes, the whispers of surrendering the northern mines, the shame of seeing a wolf like Malachor invited into their home. He stoked the embers of their discontent, reminding them of the strong, just kingdom they had once fought for, the kingdom that was now crumbling under the rule of a vain and foolish girl. He was not raising an army, not yet. He was building a consensus of outrage, preparing the ground for the truth to land on fertile soil. Back in the study, Anya carefully slid the treasonous letter from the stack, folded it, and tucked it deep within her tunic. She replaced the ledger and the other letters, locked the box, and returned the key to its hook behind the tapestry, her movements swift and silent. She slipped out of the room just as Lady Cassia, her curiosity satisfied, was returning from the balcony. She passed the scullery maid without a second glance. The invisibility that had once been her curse was now her shield and her sword. She made it back to the servants' quarters, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. In the privacy of her room, she pulled out the folded parchment. Staring at Lyra's handwriting, at the proof of her utter betrayal, Anya felt a profound shift within her. The mission was no longer simply about reclaiming a stolen birthright. Her personal injustice was now secondary to the catastrophic fate awaiting the kingdom. Lyra was not just an imposter, she was a viper, nested in the heart of Eldoria, ready to poison it for her own gain. The weight of the letter felt immense. It was a weapon powerful enough to destroy a princess, but it was also a death sentence. To be found with this, in Lyra's own hand, would mean no questions, no trial. Just a quiet corner of the dungeon and a sharp blade. The stakes of the game had just been raised higher than she could ever have imagined, and she, the forgotten girl from the kitchens, was the only one who could play it. The arrival of Lord Malachor was everything the court had feared. He was not a man who walked, he strode, a conqueror taking stock of a new acquisition. His armor was dark, unadorned steel, a stark contrast to the gaudy silks of the Eldorian nobles. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, missed nothing. He was a wolf, and the castle, with its nervous, simpering courtiers, was a pen of frightened sheep. Anya watched him from the shadows of a gallery during the formal welcome ceremony, the stolen letter a cold weight against her skin. This was the man to whom Lyra was willing to sell her kingdom. Lyra, for her part, was trying desperately to play the role of a powerful, confident princess. She wore a gown of shimmering gold, so bright it was almost blinding, a desperate attempt to project an authority she did not feel. She laughed too loudly at Malachor's grim pleasantries and gestured with a theatricality that bordered on hysteria. Malachor watched her, his expression unreadable, his politeness a thin, cold veneer. He was assessing her, and Anya could see, even from a distance, that he was not impressed. The seeds of doubt, so carefully planted by Sir Gareth, had begun to sprout in the fertile ground of the court's anxiety. Anya saw it in the way the nobles now watched Lyra. The whispers did not stop when she entered a room anymore. They merely dropped in volume, a constant rustling undercurrent of disapproval. Lord Valerius and Lord Cregan, the two councilmen Anya had overheard, now wore expressions of open concern, their gazes lingering on Lyra, then shifting to the imposing figure of Malachor. They were beginning to see the disastrous equation they had allowed to be written. This growing unease fed Lyra's paranoia. She felt the shift, the subtle change in the atmosphere. She felt the eyes on her back, the sudden silences. But lacking the wisdom to understand its source, she attributed it to conspiracy. She saw traitors in every corner. Her ladies-in-waiting were subjected to sudden, vicious interrogations. She accused a stable master of spying for a rival kingdom simply because he had praised a Riftland's horse. Her accusations grew more wild, her punishments more severe. She was a monarch losing her grip, and the more she squeezed, the more her authority slipped through her fingers. Anya, moving silently through her duties, became the unseen chronicler of Lyra's decay. She saw the fear in the eyes of the servants, but now it was mingled with something new, a flicker of contempt. They saw the princess not as a fearsome ruler, but as an unstable tyrant on the verge of collapse. The respect for the throne was dying, and Lyra herself was the one killing it. The most critical observer of this decline was Lord Malachor. He was a warlord, a man who understood power, and what he saw in Lyra was not power. He saw weakness. He saw instability. During a formal dinner, Lyra publicly berated a servant for pouring wine incorrectly, her voice shrill and ugly. Malachor watched the entire exchange with a chilling stillness. His eyes narrowed. He was not marrying a princess. He was inheriting a problem. A kingdom ruled by such a volatile woman was not a reliable asset. It was a liability. The truth, once set in motion, is a weapon, more powerful than any sword. If this moment makes your heart race, don't miss what's next. Subscribe to witness the outcome of this royal battle. One evening, Anya was delivering fresh linens to the royal wing when she saw Sir Gareth speaking quietly with two members of the royal council near a secluded alcove. He wasn't pleading or conspiring. He was simply asking questions. "Does it seem right to you?" he asked, his voice low and reasonable, "that the northern mines, the king's own protected treasury, should be part of a bride price negotiation?" He let the question hang in the air, a drop of poison in the well of their loyalty. The councilmen exchanged uneasy looks. The idea? once spoken aloud, was monstrous. Lyra's paranoia finally fixated on a concrete target. She had noticed Gareth's renewed presence, his quiet conversations. She summoned him to the throne room, intending to humiliate him, to finally crush the last remnants of her father's era. Lord Malachor was present, standing near the throne like a dark specter. "Sir Gareth," Lyra began, her voice dripping with disdain, "I am told you have been busy, spreading stories, undermining my authority." Gareth stood tall, his old armor seeming to shine with a renewed purpose. "I have only spoken the truth, Your Highness. I have reminded men of their duty to the kingdom." "Your duty is to me," Lyra shrieked, her composure shattering, "and you have failed in it. You are a relic, a ghost clinging to a past that is dead." "The past is never truly dead, Your Highness," Gareth said, his voice calm and steady, a rock against the storm of her fury. "It lives on in our honor, in our oaths." Lyra's face contorted with rage. "Guards, seize him! Confine him to the dungeons! He is a traitor!" But as the guards loyal to her stepped forward, two older guards, men who had served with Gareth under King Alaric, hesitated. They looked at Gareth, then at their hysterical princess, and for the first time, they did not move. It was a small rebellion, a moment of silent defiance, but it was as loud as a thunderclap in the tense throne room. Lyra stared, her mouth agape, her command ignored. Malachor watched it all, his face a mask of stone, but Anya, watching from the shadows where she was collecting goblets, saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Calculation. He was re-evaluating the board. He saw a princess who could not even command her own guards. Gareth used the stunned silence to his advantage. "A king's strength is not in his commands, but in the loyalty he inspires," he said, his voice ringing with authority. He turned and walked out of the throne room, unescorted and untouched. The guards did not stop him. That night, the castle was a tinderbox. Lyra was apoplectic, locked in her chambers, her power openly challenged for the first time. The court was buzzing with the news of her humiliation, and Anya knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that the time for whispers and secret plans was over. The stage was set. The final piece of the puzzle, the letter tucked safely against her heart, was ready to be played. The betrothal feast was the next night. It would be the final act. The great hall of Castle Solhaven had never looked more magnificent, nor felt more like a tomb. 1,000 candles burned in wrought iron chandeliers, their light glinting off golden goblets and the polished armor of the honor guard. At the high table, Princess Lyra sat beside Lord Malachor, radiant vision in white and gold, her smile as brittle as spun sugar. Malachor, a dark rock of a man beside her, acknowledged the toasts of the Eldorian nobles with curt, silent nods. The air was thick with forced merriment, a thin mask over the collective anxiety of a court holding its breath. Anya stood in the shadows near a stone pillar, no longer in her scullery rags, but in a simple, dark blue dress Marta had procured for her. She was, for the first time, clean, presentable, and utterly invisible in a new way, just another servant waiting to clear the plates. Sir Gareth stood near the main entrance, his hand resting calmly on the pommel of his sword, his eyes scanning the room. He gave Anya a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The time was coming. Anya's heart was a steady, resolute drum in her chest. The fear was a distant echo drowned out by a powerful, cold clarity of purpose. A royal officiant, a frail man with a reedy voice, rose to begin the formal betrothal rites. He spoke of the joining of two great realms, the promise of a new era of peace and prosperity. It was a speech of pretty, hollow words that everyone knew was a lie. Finally, he gestured to Lord Malachor. "Let the groom present the binding token, a symbol of his vow." Lord Malachor rose. He did not smile. He produced a heavy ring of dark, unadorned iron and turned to Lyra. The hall fell silent. This was the moment, the sealing of the pact, the final sale of the kingdom. As he took Lyra's hand, her fingers trembling in his grasp, Anya stepped out of the shadows and into the light. Her voice, though not loud, was so clear and steady that it cut through the silence like a shard of glass. This union cannot proceed. It is founded upon a lie. A collective gasp swept through the hall, heads swiveled, nobles rising from their seats to see the source of the interruption. Lyra's face, which had been alight with triumph, contorted into a mask of disbelief, then fury. Lord Malachor simply paused, his hand hovering over Lyra's, his stormy eyes fixing on Anya with unnerving intensity. Sir Kale was the first to react, his face turning a deep, apoplectic red. "Insolent wench," he roared, drawing his sword. "You will die for this." He lunged toward Anya, intent on cutting her down where she stood. But before he could take 3 steps, a wall of steel blocked his path. Sir Gareth and 2 other senior guards, men with faces like ancient granite, moved to intercept him. They did not draw their weapons, but stood firm, their hands on their hilts, their expressions implacable. Kale skidded to a halt, his rage turning to bewildered fury as he found himself facing the unyielding loyalty of the old guard. The standoff sent a clear, shocking message to the entire court. Power had just been publicly divided. With all eyes now on her, Anya took another step forward. She did not look at Lyra. She addressed the assembly, her voice ringing with a newfound authority. "I stand before you not as a servant, but as the daughter of your late king Alaric. On the night of her death, Queen Isolde confessed to me that, to save me from a false prophecy, she swapped me at birth. The woman at the high table is an impostor." A wave of chaotic murmurs erupted. Lyra let out a high, shrieking laugh. "She is mad, driven to fantasy by a lifetime of scrubbing floors. My mother was delirious in her final hours, her mind broken by illness." "A broken mind does not create proof," Anya countered calmly. She raised her hand, and in her palm lay the heavy golden locket. It caught the candlelight, shining like a small sun. "The queen gave me this, the personal signet of King Alaric." She opened it, displaying the portrait and the inscription for the high table to see. From their seats on the council, Lord Valerius and Lord Cregan leaned forward, their faces paling. They recognized it. Anya saw the dawning horror in their eyes. "A forgery! A stolen trinket!" Lyra screamed, her composure completely gone. She was on her feet now, her hands clenched into fists. "A stolen trinket would not come with this," Anya said, her voice rising, commanding the attention of every person in the hall. She reached into her tunic and produced the folded parchment, the treasonous letter. "I also have this, a letter drafted in the princess's own hand, a secret offer to her betrothed." She let her eyes sweep the room before they landed on the nobles of the council. "She offers Lord Malachor, as a private wedding gift, the sole and total rights to the silver mines of Eridor." The chaotic murmuring exploded into an uproar. This was not a legend or a claim of blood. This was tangible. This was treason. The nobles stared at Lyra with open horror. She had not only lied about her identity, she had plotted to give away the lifeblood of the kingdom. Lyra's face went white. "Lies, all of it. It's a forgery. She is a witch who has charmed you all with her poison words." Throughout the entire exchange, Lord Malachor had not moved. He slowly released Lyra's hand and leaned back in his chair, a single dark eyebrow raised. A small, chilling smile touched his lips. He looked from the hysterical, screaming Lyra to the calm, resolute Anya, and then to the chaos erupting among the Eldorian nobles. He was not angry. He was intrigued. He was a spectator at the spectacular implosion of the House of Eldoria, and he seemed to be enjoying the show. His prize had just been revealed as a fraud, but a new, far more interesting player had just entered the game. Lyra, seeing she had lost the court, seeing the contempt in the eyes of her nobles and the cold amusement on her betrothed's face, played her final, desperate card. She pointed a trembling finger at Anya, her voice a piercing shriek that echoed off the high stone ceilings. "I am your princess. I am your ruler. I command you. Seize the traitor and her conspirators. Arrest them all." The hall fell silent once more. Her command, a shriek of Raw panic hung in the air. The guards loyal to Sir Kale looked at him, then at Gareth's unmoving wall of steel. The nobles looked at each other, their faces a mixture of fear and dawning resolve. No one moved. In that moment of absolute silence, Lord Malachor slowly, deliberately, rose to his full height, his shadow falling over the high table. The entire kingdom held its breath, waiting to see who would break the stalemate and whose side the wolf would choose. The silence in the great hall was a living thing, heavy and absolute. Lyra's desperate command hung in the air, a shrill, powerless echo. Every eye was fixed on the two figures who held the kingdom's fate in their hands. Sir Gareth, the embodiment of the old guard, and Lord Malachor, the foreign warlord whose next move could plunge them all into war. Lord Malachor did not look at the guards or at Anya. His cold, calculating gaze fell upon Lyra, and a slow, contemptuous smile spread across his face. He had come to Eldoria to acquire an asset, and that asset had just been proven fraudulent and worthless. He gave her a short, mocking bow that was more insulting than any curse. "I came to forge an alliance with the rulers of Eldoria," he announced, his powerful voice easily filling the hall. "It appears Eldoria has no ruler at present, only a squabbling child who has been playing dress-up." He turned his back on her completely, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. He motioned to his own men, who were already moving toward the doors. "We are leaving. This farce is over." With that, he strode from the hall without a backward glance, his retinue following like a dark tide. He did not need to draw a sword or make a threat. His departure was a political execution. He had taken Lyra's last remaining shred of power and credibility with him, leaving her utterly and irrevocably alone. The sight of the Riftlands delegation abandoning her shattered the last of Sir Kale's resolve. His authority had been derived entirely from Lyra's, and her authority had just walked out the door. He looked at Gareth's unyielding stance, at the uncertain faces of his own men, and his rage dissolved into a desperate animal fear. Sir Gareth stepped forward into the power vacuum. He did not even look at Lyra. His stern gaze fell upon Sir Kyle. "Sir Kyle," Gareth said, his voice ringing with the cold clarity of justice, "you are charged with abuse of your station, with cruelty to the subjects of this kingdom, and with enforcing the will of a usurper. You brutalized a child for a spilled drink. You tormented the powerless to feed your own pride." He turned to the guards who had once served Kyle. "This man betrayed his oath to protect the people of Eldoria. I say he is no knight. I say he is a common criminal." Anya watched as the guards, finally freed from Kale's tyranny, seemed to stand taller. On Gareth's command, two of them moved forward, their faces hard with grim satisfaction. They seized Sir Kale, who sputtered and struggled for a moment before sagging in defeat. His reign of petty terror was over. Finally, only Lyra remained. She stood at the high table, a golden queen on a throne of air, her face pale and streaked with tears of rage and disbelief. The entire court stared at her, not with fear but with a cold, unified contempt. Her power was gone. Her name was a lie. She was nothing. Anya walked toward her, her steps measured and even. She felt no triumph, only a deep, profound sense of sorrow for the two lives that had been broken by the queen's long-ago fear. She stopped before the high table and looked up at the girl who had caused her so much pain. "It's over, Lyra," Anya said, her voice soft, yet it carried across the silent hall. "You will not have this throne," Lyra hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "I will not let you. I would burn this castle to the ground before I see a kitchen rat like you rule it." "You have already tried," Anya replied, her calm a stark contrast to Lyra's. "Hysteria. You tried to burn it down for a handful of silver, but this castle, this kingdom, is stronger than your greed." She would not order Lyra's death. That would be a mercy, a quick end to her humiliation. Justice, Anya decided, needed to be more poetic. You spent a lifetime enjoying a crown you did not earn. Now, you will live a life without one. She turned to Sir Gareth. "Confine her to the North Tower. She will be given food, water, and clothes suitable to her station." She paused, then added, "The station of a minor noble's daughter. See to it that she is comfortable, and that she is never seen in the halls of this castle again." The North Tower, the same tower that overlooked the old royal nursery, the tower from which her own mother, Queen Isolde, had likely watched her be carried away into a life of poverty. Lyra would now live as a prisoner, not of stone and iron, but of the crushing, inescapable truth of who she was, a footnote in a history that no longer belonged to her. As the guards led her away, sobbing and cursing, the great hall was finally cleansed of the poison that had infected it for 2 decades. And so the false sun set, her stolen light extinguished not by a sword, but by the truth. A kingdom held its breath, finally free from the shadow of tyranny. True justice is a powerful sight to behold. Let us know in the comments what you believe is the most fitting fate for a fallen tyrant. For a long moment, there was only the sound of 100 people breathing. The immediate danger had passed. The antagonists were defeated. The rebellion, so brief and potent, was over. The nobles, the servants, the guards, they all slowly turned their heads. Their gazes moved past the empty high table, past the discarded ring of Lord Malachor, and settled on the one figure standing in the center of it all. Anya stood alone, the heavy locket still in her hand, her simple dress a stark reminder of the world she had come from. She had won. She had reclaimed her name. But as she looked at the sea of faces staring back at her, faces filled with hope, fear, and expectation, she felt a weight descend upon her that was far heavier than any crown. The traitor was gone, the throne was empty, and every eye in the hall was now on her, asking the same silent, terrifying question: what happens now? The silence that followed Lord Malachor's departure and Lyra's removal was heavier than any that had come before. It was a silence filled with 1,000 unasked questions, a vacuum of power waiting to be filled. The nobles of Eldoria, their faces a mixture of shock, shame, and a dawning, fragile hope, all stared at the girl in the center of the hall. She wore no crown. She held no scepter. She was armed with nothing but the truth and a small, heavy locket. In that moment, Anya was not just a claimant to the throne. She was the living soul of their broken kingdom. She felt the crushing weight of their expectations, a force more intimidating than Sir Kale's sword or Lyra's scorn. Her entire life had been spent avoiding notice, and now she was the center of a nation's gaze. She saw Sir Gareth give her a subtle, encouraging nod from across the room, his eyes telling her that the hardest part was over, but the most important part had just begun. Anya took a deep breath, letting the air fill her lungs, and found her voice. It did not boom with practiced rhetoric, but it was clear, steady, and carried to every corner of the hall. "Tonight," she began, her gaze sweeping across the faces of the council, the guards, and the servants, still huddled by the walls. "Tonight, we have been shown the poison of a lie that has starved our people, weakened our kingdom, and nearly sold our future to a foreign warlord. That lie is now broken." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I stand before you as the daughter of King Alaric and Queen Isolde. I cannot erase the past 20 years. I cannot undo the suffering that a mother's fear and a usurper's pride have caused. But I can promise you this: from this day forward, we will be a kingdom of truth." She turned her attention to the council members, Lord Valerius and Lord Cregan, who watched her with wary apprehension. "My father built this kingdom on the foundations of strength and justice. My mother, with her final breath, sought to restore it. I will not rule with fear as Lyra did. I ask for your counsel, your wisdom, and your loyalty, not to me as an individual, but to the crown of Eldoria and the people we are sworn to serve. The work of mending what has been broken begins now, and it must begin together." Then she did something no ruler in living memory had ever done. She turned to the servants, to the men and women she had lived and worked alongside, whose silent suffering she knew intimately. "You have been the unseen foundation of this castle. You have endured the most and been given the least. Your quiet dignity in the face of cruelty has been a lesson I will never forget. Under my rule, you will not be invisible." A wave of stunned emotion washed over the staff. For the first time, they were not just part of the scenery, they were seen. To solidify her words with action, she made her first decree. "The royal granaries are full," she announced, her voice ringing with conviction. They were filled to provide a lavish dowry for an alliance that would have destroyed us. That alliance is broken. The feast is over. She looked directly at Suri. "Gareth, tomorrow at dawn, open the granaries. Distribute the grain to the people of this city. No family in the capital will go hungry this week. The wealth of this kingdom will no longer serve the vanity of the throne. It will serve the needs of its people." The decision was simple, immediate, and profound. It was an act of compassion, but also a masterstroke of political wisdom. With one command, she had shown a definitive break from Lyra's selfish regime, and had won the unwavering loyalty of the common folk. Lord Valerius, his face etched with a newfound respect, was the first to move. He stepped forward, followed by Lord Cregan, and they bowed deeply before her. "We have failed this kingdom by allowing our fear to blind us," Valerius said, his voice humbled. "We will not fail it again. The Royal Council recognizes you as the true heir of King Alaric. We pledge our fealty and our lives to you, Queen Anya." The title, spoken aloud for the first time, sent a shiver through her. It sounded foreign, impossible, and yet perfectly right. Later that night, long after the great hall had been cleared, Anya found herself standing in the royal study, the room where she had risked everything to find the proof she needed. The fire was lit now, casting a warm, gentle glow over the maps and books. She ran her hand over the polished oak of the desk, no longer an intruder, but its rightful occupant. She felt the exhaustion of the day settle deep into her bones, but beneath it was a profound sense of peace. She walked to the large window, looking out over the sleeping city of Solhaven. The lights of the houses twinkled below like fallen stars. For 20 years, she had viewed this world from the bottom up, from a place of dirt and shadows. She had felt its pains, known its struggles. What she had always believed to be her curse, her life of servitude, was, she now realized, her greatest strength. She did not need to be taught about her people. She, one of them, the memories of hunger, of cold, of injustice, they would not be a source of bitterness, but a constant guiding reminder of why she now had to rule and for whom. The crown was still invisible, but for the first time she could feel its weight, not as a burden, but as an anchor. The work had just begun. As the seasons turned, a fragile spring swept through Eldoria, breathing life not just into the dormant fields, but into the heart of its people. The 6 months under Queen Anya's rule had been a quiet revelation. The oppressive fear that had lingered in the castle halls like a persistent chill had vanished, replaced by a bustling, hopeful energy. The changes were not loud or dramatic, but they were profound. The royal ledgers now spoke of grain stores being replenished, of fair wages for castle staff, and of infrastructure projects to repair roads and bridges, not of lavish gowns and foreign jewels. Anya's throne room was unlike any the court had seen before. The petitioners were not just fawning nobles, but guildmasters, farmers, and merchants. She sat not on a distant, intimidating throne, but at a large oak table, listening intently, her expression serious and thoughtful. Sir Gareth, his hair now completely white, but his eyes sharp as ever, stood at her side, a pillar of unwavering support. On this day, she presided over a dispute between a sheep farmer and a wealthy landowner. Anya listened to both sides patiently. The landowner spoke of ancient charters and property lines. The farmer spoke of his flock needing access to the only clean stream in the valley. Lyra would have sided with the wealthy noble without a second thought. Anya, however, leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table. "Lord Creston," she said, her voice calm and even, "your charter gives you rights to the land, but it does not give you the right to let your neighbor's flock perish. A kingdom is only as strong as its weakest link." She then proposed a solution. The landowner would grant access to the stream, and in return, the crown would grant him a small tax reprieve for his show of community spirit. It was a simple, elegant solution that upheld the law while ensuring justice. The farmer left with tears of gratitude in his eyes, and the landowner left with his dignity intact and a newfound respect for his queen. She ruled with a wisdom that baffled the older councilmen until they realized her wisdom was not born from books, but from experience. She knew the cost of bread because she had felt the pangs of hunger. She knew the value of a warm cloak because she had shivered through long winters. She understood the quiet desperation of the common folk because she had lived it. Even the world beyond their borders had taken notice. One afternoon, Sir Gareth brought her a message, its seal bearing the familiar snarling wolf of the Riftlands. It was not a threat. It was a formal request from Lord Malachor to open negotiations for a trade treaty, addressed to Her Majesty Anya, the Queen of Eldoria. The warlord who had come to conquer a weak kingdom was now respectfully asking for an audience with a strong one. Anya simply nodded, a small, knowing smile on her lips. She had earned his respect, not with a dowry, but with strength. That evening, as dusk painted the sky in hues of purple and gold, Anya stepped onto the high balcony of her study. The same balcony from which she had once watched a servant boy be dragged away for a foolish mistake. The air was cool and clean, and the city of Solhaven spread out below her, its lights twinkling to life. A sense of peace settled over her, a feeling so foreign it was almost startling. The constant, gnawing fear that had been her companion for so long was gone, its absence leaving a quiet, calm space in her soul. He would be proud, you know. Gareth's voice made her turn. The old knight stood in the doorway, his gaze soft. King Alaric. He always said a ruler's true wealth was the contentment of their people. By that measure, you are the wealthiest monarch this kingdom has ever known. Anya turned back to the view, her hands resting on the cold stone of the balustrade. There are still hungry families in the western provinces, Gareth, and the treasury is a long way from being full. The work is not over. No, Your Majesty, he said, joining her at the railing. It is not, but the foundation is strong. For the first time in a long time, the people of Eldoria believe in the crown. He looked out at the horizon, at the endless expanse of her kingdom, her home. The ghosts of the past were finally at peace. She was not the frightened scullery maid, nor the vengeful girl with a secret. She was the sum of all her parts, the survivor, the strategist, the queen. She had taken the worst of her life and forged it into the best of her reign. They tried to bury her in the ashes of the kitchen, to let her be forgotten by a history that was rightfully hers. They did not know she was forged from the fire, and truth of the kings before her. Her crown was not inherited by chance, nor was it stolen in the dark. It was earned through suffering, earned through courage, and earned through a fierce, unwavering belief that justice was not a gift for the few, but a right for all. If her story has inspired you, and if you believe in the queens who rise from the ashes, then join our kingdom, to our channel, and help us tell more stories of the strength that lies where the world least expects it.